Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub, where timeless horror is reborn. Tonight, we journey into The Nameless Offspring by Clark Ashton Smith, a tale of vaults, shadows, and unspeakable creatures. What you will hear is a reimagined narration, carefully rewritten to bring fresh suspense and avoid repetition, crafted exclusively for our audience. Prepare yourself. The vaults are opening once again.
They buried her in the family vault, believing death had claimed her. Yet, in the suffocating silence of the tomb, her eyes fluttered open. She awoke not to salvation, but to horror. For through the shadows a face leaned close, a visage so grotesque it seemed carved from nightmare itself. 9 months later, she gave birth to a child no one dared to name. The mother perished in the act, leaving behind a creature whose existence was a secret locked away in stone chambers. Years passed, and whispers grew, of footsteps in the dark, of doors rattling at midnight, of a hunger that could not be contained. When the patriarch was found lifeless, his body torn and gnawed, the truth could no longer be denied. The chamber that had held the offspring stood open, its door shattered, and in the rain-soaked earth outside, monstrous tracks led back toward the vault, as if the creature had returned to the place of its cursed birth. Since the dawn of time, Earth has carried within her shadows countless horrors, creatures that slumber beneath forgotten stones, that rise with the roots of ancient trees, that drift unseen in the abyssal seas and crawl through caverns far below. Some of these terrors mankind has glimpsed, others remain hidden, awaiting the dreadful day of their unveiling. And of all these abominations, the vilest is whispered of only in forbidden texts, the spawn of something buried deep in vaults, mingled with mortal flesh. It is perhaps a mercy that the tale I now recount is shrouded in fragments, half-formed hints, veiled in secrecy. Were it fully revealed, no human hand could write it, nor human eye endure its reading. My own role in this nightmare was but the final act. The earlier chapters reached me only as a legend, carried in hushed voices and uneasy glances. Yet even those echoes of horror have eclipsed the ordinary events of life, making them seem fragile threads spun at the edge of a vast abyss, an abyss where corruption festers in the dark. From childhood, I had heard the name Tremoth whispered, for Sir John Tremoth had once been my father's schoolmate, but I had never met him, nor set foot in Tremoth Hall, until fate drew me into the tragedy that would mark its end. My father had carried me from England to Canada when I was an infant, prospering there as a keeper of bees. After his death, the ranch demanded my years and my labor, delaying my long-cherished dream of returning to my native land and wandering its rural byways. Only when that dream was finally realized did I step into the shadow of Tremoth Hall and into the legend that would become my own.
When I finally set out across the sea, the old legend of Tremoth Hall was little more than a faded memory. I had no intention of seeking it, nor did I carry any morbid curiosity that might have lured others to its shadowed grounds. My arrival there was pure accident, an unplanned detour written by chance and fog. Had I known where I was headed, I believe I would have turned away, even in need of shelter, rather than trespass upon the haunted misery of its master. That autumn day had begun brightly. I rode for hours through rolling hills and winding lanes, beneath skies of pale blue and trees just beginning to burn with amber and crimson. But by mid-afternoon, A mist crept inland from the unseen ocean, wrapping me in its shifting veil. Landmarks vanished, mileposts dissolved into shadow, and I lost my way. The lane I followed grew rough and empty, bordered by heath and scattered boulders, with no trace of human cultivation. The fog thickened as twilight fell, swallowing the horizon. I descended a long slope, believing I rode westward, yet no glow of sunset marked the sky, only a dim pallor, heavy with the scent of salt marshes. The road bent sharply, leading me between downs and wetlands. Night gathered with unnatural haste, as if eager to overtake me. A chill unease stirred within, for the landscape seemed less like England and more like some forgotten borderland, where silence pressed close and mystery lingered in every shadow. To my left, faint through the fog, a single light appeared, like the sorrowful gleam of a tear-dimmed eye. It glowed among blurred shapes that seemed less like trees of this world and more like phantoms from some spectral forest. As I drew nearer, the haze revealed a small lodge, the kind that might guard the entrance to an old estate. It stood silent, abandoned, its windows dark. Beyond it, I discerned the outline of a wrought iron gate, half swallowed by a hedge of wild, untrimmed yew. The place exuded desolation, a chill that seeped into my bones, carried on the damp breath of the marsh. Yet the light promised human presence, perhaps shelter, perhaps guidance through the lonely downs. To my surprise, the gate yielded easily, creaking open with a rusty groan, as though it had not been touched in years. I pushed my motorcycle along a weed-choked drive, and soon the looming shape of a manor emerged. Its sprawling mass was framed by grotesque trees and shrubs, their twisted forms more monstrous than any gardener had intended. The fog thickened into a cold drizzle. Feeling my way through the gloom, I found a heavy door, far from the solitary window that cast its glow. I knocked 3 times. At last I heard slow, dragging footsteps within. The door opened reluctantly, and there stood an old man, a taper flickering in his trembling hand. Shadows leapt behind him in the dim hall, stretching across his wrinkled face like the wings of unseen creatures. "What do you seek, sir?" he asked. His voice quavered, hesitant, yet not unfriendly. Still, there was something uncertain in his manner, an irresolution that betrayed caution. As I explained my plight, I felt his eyes upon me, sharp and probing, belying the frailty his trembling fingers suggested. "I knew you were a stranger here," the old man said after hearing my account. "May I ask your name, sir?" "Henry Chaldain," I replied. His eyes narrowed with sudden recognition. "Then you are the son of Arthur Chaldain? Yes, you bear his likeness. Your father and Sir John Tremoth were close friends, long ago, before Canada claimed him. Come in, sir. This is Tremoth Hall. Sir John seldom receives visitors, but I shall tell him of your arrival. Perhaps he will wish to see you." The revelation startled me. Tremoth Hall, this place of whispered legend, stood before me, and I had stumbled upon it by chance. Uneasy, yet compelled, I followed the old man into a study lined with books. The room spoke of wealth long past, its furnishings dulled by dust and neglect. He lit an antique lamp, its painted shade casting a wan yellow glow, and left me alone among the shadows.
As I waited, a strange embarrassment pressed upon me, as though I had intruded where no living guest should tread. Memories stirred, half-forgotten fragments of a tale my father had once spoken in hushed tones. Lady Agatha Tremoth, Sir John's wife, had been stricken with cataleptic seizures in the first year of their marriage. The third attack seemed final. She did not awaken, her body stiff with the marks of death. She was laid to rest in the family vaults, ancient chambers carved deep into the hill behind the manor. But the following day, Sir John, tormented by doubt, returned to the vaults. There he heard a cry, a wild, desperate scream, and found Lady Agatha sitting upright in her coffin. The nailed lid lay shattered on the stone floor. How she had freed herself was a mystery, for her frail body could never have forced its way out, yet no other explanation could be offered, and Lady Agatha herself spoke little of the horror of her resurrection.
Half-dazed and trembling with terror, Lady Agatha spoke in fragments, her words broken and incoherent. She remembered little of her coffin or the struggle to escape it. What haunted her instead was the vision of a face, pale, grotesque, unearthly, that had loomed above her in the darkness as she awoke from her death-like trance. It was this sight that had torn the scream from her throat. The thing had fled before Sir John arrived, vanishing into the deeper vaults. She could describe it only in vague impressions. A creature large and white, moving on all fours like some monstrous beast, yet with limbs disturbingly close to human. Her account was dismissed as delirium, the fevered dream of a woman shocked back from the grave. But the memory of that face never left her. It gnawed at her mind, leaving her broken in body and spirit. 9 months later, she died, mercifully, some said, after giving birth to her first child. The child itself was whispered to be a horror beyond imagining. No one spoke clearly of its deformities, but rumors spread from doctors, nurses, and servants who had glimpsed it. Several fled Tremoth Hall, refusing ever to return. After Agatha's death, Sir John withdrew from the world. He lived as a recluse, his estate decaying around him, his only companions a handful of loyal servants. It was said the child was locked away in a barred chamber, seen by no one but Sir John himself. The tragedy had consumed his life, leaving him a shadow of the man he once was. As I sat in the study, recalling these dreadful whispers from my childhood, I was startled by the sound of footsteps, slow, dragging, feeble. I assumed it was the old servant returning, but in that moment I could not shake the thought of what else might walk these halls. I was mistaken. The figure who entered was no servant. It was Sir John Tremoth himself. Tall, though slightly stooped, his face bore the deep, corroded lines of sorrow and illness, yet carried a strange dignity that seemed to defy both. I had expected an old man, but he was scarcely past middle age. Still, his pallor was cadaverous, his steps faltering, the gait of one marked by a fatal malady. His manner, however, was unfailingly gracious. "Harper tells me you are the son of my old friend Arthur Chaldane," he said. "You are welcome to what little hospitality I can offer. I have not received guests in many years, and this hall may seem dull and dismal. Yet you must remain tonight. Harper is preparing dinner." I protested that I might be intruding, but he silenced me with firm courtesy. "Not at all. The nearest inn is miles away, and the fog has turned to heavy rain. I am glad of your company. At dinner, you must tell me of your father and of yourself. For now, let me find you a room." He led me up the manor's second floor, through a corridor canneled in ancient oak. We passed several closed doors,
but one stood out, a door reinforced with iron bars, grim and heavy as those of a dungeon. The sight chilled me. Inevitably, I thought of the monstrous child, locked away from the world. Could it still live after 30 years? What hideous deformity, what abhorrent growth had demanded such fortification? Bars upon oak stout enough to resist any ordinary man or beast. My host moved on without so much as a glance at the barred door, the taper in his hand steady despite his frail fingers. I followed, lost in uneasy thoughts, until the silence shattered. From behind the iron-bound chamber came a cry, sudden and terrible. It began as a subterranean moan, deep and muffled, like the voice of something buried in tombs. Then it rose, climbing through hideous degrees until it became a shrill, ravenous howl, a fury that seemed to claw its way up from the underworld into the open air. It was no sound of man or beast. It was something wholly other, preternatural, hell-born. My blood froze as the ululation reached its dreadful peak, then ebbed back into silence, sinking once more into sepulchral depths.
Sir John gave no sign of hearing. He continued with his faltering steps, pausing at the end of the hall before a chamber. "You may have this room," he said, his voice flat, restrained, as though drained of all human warmth. I realized with a shudder that his own quarters lay directly beside the barred door, the source of that infernal cry. The room he offered me was long abandoned. The air was stale, heavy with dust and cobwebs, the furniture cloaked in neglect. Sir John apologized, promising Harper would prepare it after dinner. I murmured vague reassurances, though the decay of the manor and the desolation of its master weighed upon me with oppressive force. I dared not dwell on the secret of the barred chamber, nor on the monstrous voice that still echoed in my nerves. Yet regret gnawed at me. Chance had led me to this place of shadows, and already I longed to flee, into the storm, into the rain, anywhere but here. But no excuse seemed possible. I was trapped, compelled to remain within Tremoth Hall, beneath its roof of silence and horror. Dinner was served in a room both stately and desolate, its grandeur dimmed by years of neglect. Harper, the old man, who seemed to embody every role of servant, butler, and cook, brought forth a plain but well-prepared meal, his service flawless despite the gloom. Yet the ceremony of eating felt more like a funeral than a feast. Hunger did little to distract me from the sealed door upstairs or from the memory of that dreadful cry which had pierced the silence. Whatever lurked behind those iron bars was alive, and as I studied Sir John Tremoth's gaunt, noble face, I felt a strange mixture of pity, admiration, and horror. His life had been consumed by a torment beyond imagining, and yet he bore it with a grim fortitude. A bottle of sherry was produced, rich and potent. We sat together for more than an hour, Sir John speaking with polished ease about my father, whose death he had not known, and drawing me out with the skill of a worldly man. Of himself he said almost nothing. Not a word, not even a hint, touched upon the tragedy that hung over Tremoth Hall. I drank sparingly, but Sir John consumed deeply, and as the wine took hold, his reserve loosened. At last he spoke of his health, the truth already written in his pallid features. He suffered from a cruel affliction of the heart, angina pectoris, and had only recently survived a severe attack. "The next one will finish me," he said, with a calmness that chilled me. "Perhaps tonight." He spoke as if predicting the weather, his tone simple, untroubled. Then, after a pause, his voice grew heavier, more deliberate. "You may think me strange, but I have a fixed resolve against burial. I have left strict instructions that my body be cremated. Fire is the purest of elements.
It spares the dead the indignities of decay, the crawling worms, the mold of tombs. I cannot bear the thought of lying in some damp vault, rotting in silence."
Sir John lingered on the subject of cremation with a strange fervour, his words taut and deliberate, as though rehearsed countless times in solitude. The theme seemed to possess him, a morbid obsession reflected in the haunted gleam of his hollow eyes and the suppressed tremor in his voice. I could not help recalling Lady Agatha's burial, her ghastly resurrection, and the delirious horror of the vaults. His aversion to the grave was understandable, but I sensed there was a deeper terror beneath it, something unspeakable. Harper had vanished after serving the sherry, no doubt to prepare my chamber. At last our glasses were drained, and Sir John's voice faltered into silence. The brief vitality the wine had given him ebbed away, leaving him pale, haggard, and visibly ill. I excused myself with fatigue, and he, ever courteous, insisted on escorting me upstairs. In the upper hall we encountered Harper descending from the attic stair, carrying a heavy iron pan. A few scraps of meat clung to its bottom, and from it rose a stench, rank, gamey, almost putrid. The odour struck me with a sudden dreadful suspicion. Had he been feeding the thing confined in the barred chamber, perhaps through some hidden trap above? The thought was plausible enough, yet the smell carried darker associations, stirring half-remembered tales from distant lands. A grotesque possibility formed in my mind, too atrocious to believe, too abhorrent to accept. Could it be, here in England of all places, that corpse-devouring demon of legend, the ghoul? We passed the sealed door in silence. No howl greeted us this time. Yet faintly, beneath the hush, I thought I heard a sound, steady, deliberate, the crunching of jaws, like some great beast gnawing its meal. The echo followed me into the shadows of my chamber, gnawing at my nerves as surely as the unseen creature gnawed its flesh.
My chamber, though bleak and heavy with age, had been cleared of its cobwebs and dust. Sir John himself inspected it before retiring, his pallor ghostly, his weakness unmistakable. As he bid me good night, I felt a pang of guilt. His courtesy seemed to cost him dearly, as though every gesture strained against the torment of his failing heart. Exhaustion and wine should have carried me swiftly into sleep, yet I lay restless, eyes shut tight, besieged by visions conjured from the ancient house. Shadows pressed upon me, foul and unnameable, their talons raking, their coils brushing against my skin. The rain's dripping, the wind's moan, became a chorus of muttering voices, half-formed, conspiratorial, whispering secrets in a language not meant for human ears. Hours passed like centuries. At last, the storm subsided, the voices fell silent, and the window glimmered faintly against the black wall. But sleep did not come. Instead, in the hush, I caught a sound, faint, elusive, unnerving. At times it seemed distant, muffled, then it crept closer, as though just beyond the wall. I strained to listen, and recognition struck me with horror. It was scratching, claws raking wood, deliberate and insistent. My heart froze as I realized the sound came from the direction of the barred chamber. The scratching swelled, resonant, then dwindled to nothing. Silence returned, broken suddenly by a groan. It was the voice of a man in agony, unmistakable, issuing from Sir John Tremoth's room. And in that instant I knew the truth. The scratching was no phantom of my imagination. It was the offspring, stirring in its prison. The groan was never repeated. Instead, the clawing began anew. an infernal rasping that scraped through the silence until dawn. It seemed the creature was bound to the night, its habits wholly nocturnal, for with the first pallid light the scratching ceased, leaving me in a haze of exhaustion and dread. At last I slipped into a heavy sleep, beyond the reach of the hall's phantoms. I awoke to a pounding at my door, urgent, insistent. Disoriented, I realized it was nearly midday. Harper stood outside, his frail frame trembling, his grief etched into every line of his face. Before he spoke, I knew tragedy had struck. "Mr. Chaldane," he quavered, "Sir John is dead. He did not answer my knock this morning, so I entered his room. He must have passed away early today."
Shock coursed through me. My mind leapt back to the single groan I had heard at dawn. Was that his final breath? Or had it been a cry of terror, wrung from him by the monstrous scratching that haunted the night? Had the strain of listening to that unholy sound hastened his end? My thoughts swirled with ghastly conjectures, but I forced myself into the hollow rituals of condolence. I offered Harper what aid I could, promising to help with arrangements. With no telephone in the hall, I volunteered to fetch a doctor to examine the body and sign the certificate. The old servant's relief was palpable, his gratitude tinged with the weary resignation of one who had lived too long in the shadow of horror. "Thank you, sir," Harper said with trembling fervor. His voice carried the weight of a promise. He would not leave Sir John's side, for he had sworn to keep vigil over the body. He spoke then of his master's final wish, a pyre of driftwood to be built upon the hill behind the hall, his remains consumed by fire, and his ashes scattered across the estate. No relatives were to be summoned until all was done. Only Harper and a handful of hired bearers would attend the ceremony. I declined his offer of breakfast, sensing his unease. His manner betrayed an urgency, a restless anxiety to begin his watch beside the corpse. The afternoon passed in a haze of fog and silence. I trudged through a sodden, unreal world to the nearby town, where I secured a doctor and several men to prepare the pyre. Yet everywhere I was met with taciturn faces, lips sealed against the dark legend of Tremoth Hall. No one spoke of Sir John's death, nor of the whispers that clung to his name. Harper astonished me by proposing the cremation at once. But the weather betrayed us. The fog thickened into relentless rain, drenching the hill and making fire impossible. The ceremony was postponed. Bound by my promise, I returned to the hall, condemned to spend another night beneath its roof of festering secrets. Darkness fell early. After a final errand to the village, I brought back a meager supper of sandwiches. As I ascended towards the death chamber, Harper met me on the stairs. His agitation was unmistakable. Something had unsettled him, something that had happened while he kept his watch beside the body. "I wonder if you'd keep me company tonight, Mr. Chaldane," Harper said, his voice trembling. "It will be a grim watch, perhaps even a dangerous one, but Sir John would want it. If you have a weapon, bring it." I could not refuse. Unarmed, I accepted the antique revolver he pressed into my hand, its cold weight a relic of forgotten wars. He carried its twin. "Tell me plainly, Harper," I demanded as we walked the hall toward Sir John's chamber, "what is it you fear?" He flinched, reluctant, then spoke with grim necessity. "It's the thing in the barred room. You must have heard it. Sir John and I have kept it these 28 years, always fearing it might break free. It never troubled us, so long as it was fed. But for 3 nights now, it has clawed at the wall of Sir John's chamber. He believed it knew he was dying,
and that it hungered for his body. That is why we must guard him tonight. I pray the wall will hold, but the sound grows hollow, as if the wood is thinning beneath its talons. His words confirmed my darkest suspicion. The horror was no mere legend. It was real, pressing closer. I longed to escape the vigil, but duty bound me to remain. As we passed the barred chamber, the scratching erupted again, bestial, relentless, a frenzy of claws tearing at oak. The sound was unbearable, a macabre rhythm of hunger that gnawed at the nerves. When we entered the death chamber, it grew louder still, vibrating through the walls with hideous insistence, as though the creature's fury was straining toward release. Throughout that grim day, I had avoided the death chamber, unwilling to indulge the morbid curiosity that drives some to stare upon the dead. But now, for the second and final time, I beheld Sir John Tremoth. He lay fully dressed upon the white bed, prepared for the pyre, the heavy curtains drawn back to reveal his pallid form. Tall tapers flickered in ancient brazen candelabras, their greened metal casting only a feeble glow across the vast, shadow-haunted room. Against my will, I looked upon his face. I expected the stillness of death, but not the revelation it carried, the etched horror of a lifetime spent in silent torment, the mask of dignity stripped away to expose the corrosion of fear. It seemed almost that he was not dead at all, but listening still, straining toward the dreadful sounds that had haunted him to the end. Harper and I seated ourselves near the small table between the deathbed and the paneled wall from which the ceaseless scratching issued. Our revolvers lay ready, cocked in silence. The vigil began. As we waited, my mind betrayed me. Images of the creature, shapeless, half-formed, born of nightmare, chased each other through my thoughts. A vile curiosity urged me to question Harper, but something stronger held me back. He offered no words, no comfort, only sat rigid, his eyes fixed on the wall, bright with fear, his head trembling yet unyielding. The silence between us was heavy, broken only by the clawing that gnawed at the wood and at our nerves. The hours dragged on in a torment of suspense, each moment stretched taut with dread. The wall was thick, ancient oak that should have resisted any ordinary assault, but the scratching never ceased. To my fevered mind it seemed sharper, nearer, as though talons were carving their way toward us. At intervals a low, eager whining rose from behind the wood, the sound of a ravenous beast closing in on its prey. Neither Harper nor I spoke of what we would do if the creature broke through, yet the silence between us was heavy with unspoken resolve. Still, a superstitious terror gnawed at me. Was this thing human enough to fall to bullets, or did it carry in its veins the invulnerability of some darker parentage? The thought was absurd, I told myself, yet it returned again and again, pulling me toward the abyss of forbidden speculation. The night flowed like a black, sluggish river. The tall tapers guttered low, their sockets green with age, marking the passage of time in inches of dying flame. I felt submerged in eternity, drowning beneath the ceaseless scratching, until the sound itself seemed unreal, a hallucination born of exhaustion. Then it came, the end of our vigil. A harsh crack split the silence. A strip of wood dangled loose from the panel. Before I could believe my senses, the wall gave way in a thunder of splinters. A massive body had hurled itself through, shattering the barrier, and the chamber of death was no longer sealed from the horror beyond.
Mercifully, my memory spares me the full vision of what burst through the shattered panel. The shock was too great, the horror too immense. What remains is only a blurred impression, a pale, hairless bulk, half human, half beast, its face twisted with canine fangs, its limbs ending in talons like a hyena's claws. A stench of carrion preceded it, foul and suffocating, and then, like a nightmare sprung to life, it leapt upon us. Harper's revolver cracked, sharp and vengeful, but mine betrayed me with a hollow click. Before I could fire again, the thing struck me down, hurling me against the table with brutal force. Darkness fell, a curtain spangled with phantom sparks, then all light was gone. When awareness returned, it was to fire. The acrid smell of burning cloth filled my lungs, and the room swam back into vision. I lay sprawled beside the overturned table, staring at the deathbed. The candles had been flung to the floor, one gnawed a circle of flame into the carpet, another had caught the bed curtains, which now blazed upward in a furious canopy. Shreds of burning fabric fell upon the bed, and Sir John's body was encircled by rising flames. I staggered to my feet, dazed, my head throbbing from the blow. The chamber was empty save for Harper, who lay groaning near the door. The door itself stood open, as if something had fled during my oblivion. I turned back to the bed, driven by a half-formed instinct to fight the fire, though dread still clung to me like smoke. The flames rose higher, consuming the chamber, yet not swiftly enough to spare me the sight of what remained of Sir John Tremoth. His features, if they could still be called such, were twisted by a final horror I dare not describe. The monster had fled too late, driven back only by fire. There is little more to tell of that room. As I staggered out, bearing Harper's frail body, I looked back once more. The bed and its canopy were engulfed, a towering pyre. In death, Sir John had found the cremation he had long desired, his funeral carried out by the very blaze that destroyed his house. By dawn, the rain had ceased. The sky was a pall of gray clouds, and the chill air revived Harper enough for him to stand beside me in silence. Together we watched Tremoth Hall burn, its roof spewing a spire of flame that cast a lurid glow across the hedges.
Then, in that mingled light of dawn and fire, we saw them, fresh tracks in the wet soil. Semi-human, monstrous, marked with long canine claws. They led away from the manor, across the heath, toward the hill behind. Wordless, we followed. The prince led us to the ancient family vaults, sealed for a generation by Sir John's command. The iron door hung open, its lock and chain shattered by a strength beyond man or beast. Inside, the clay-stained footprints descended into the mausolean dark. We were weaponless, our revolvers left behind in the death chamber. Yet hesitation never crossed us. Harper carried matches, and I armed myself with a sodden billet of wood. In grim silence, we pressed forward, striking match after match, our flickering light revealing only fragments of the endless vaults. The shadows closed around us, heavy with the stench of centuries, as we searched for what had fled into the tombs.
The monstrous tracks led us deep into the vaults, but soon they faded, swallowed by damp stone and webs untouched for decades. We found nothing, only the endless coffins of the dead, the chill of subterranean air, and the silence of a place that seemed to deny all intrusion. The creature had vanished, as if the walls themselves had consumed it. At last we returned to the entrance. Daylight struck our faces, gray and haggard from the vigil. Harper, silent until then, spoke in a voice frail and trembling. "Years ago, after Lady Agatha's death, Sir John and I searched these vaults from end to end. We found nothing then, and we find nothing now. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. The offspring of the vaults has gone back to the vaults. There it may remain." His words lingered in the air, heavy with resignation. And in my shaken heart I echoed them too, praying that the horror would never rise again from its tomb of shadows.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.